Good Erev Shabbos, everybody. Welcome to our pre-Shabbos sermon for this week's portion, Vayakel-Pikude. It's also Parshas HaChodesh. The Shabbos is Shabbos Mevorchim of the month of Nisan, the month of Passover. It's also Erev Rosh Chodesh, so it's a very special Shabbos in all different ways. I begin with Birchas Kohanim, Vayadaber Dinei Moshe Lemar, Daber Alam Rabban Avleime Kesavorachos Bnei Yisrael Amar Lahem, Yivarechecha Adinoi V'Yishmerecha, Yoyer Adinoi Pona V'Elecha V'Chuneka, Yis Adinoi Pona V'Elecha V'Yosem Lecha Shalom. V'Samle Shemiah Bnei Yisrael V'Ani Avarachem. I also want to thank the sponsors for the Kiddush tomorrow that will be served in our outdoor sanctuary. It's a Kiddush to go. It's all prepared in a box for you. I also want to welcome everyone to consider coming back to shul. We set it up in a socially distant way. People are still wearing masks. So if you've gotten your vaccinations or you've had COVID and you have antibodies, consider coming to us tomorrow morning at 9:30 for davening in a beautiful outdoor Mishkan. The sponsors for Kiddush tomorrow, Michael and Lisa David. This is in honor of Michael's birthday and their son Noah's birthday. Happy birthday. It's sponsored by Gil Epstein. It's Gil's father's yahrzeit. His neshama should have an aliyah. And it's Nanette Siegel's birthday. A happy birthday to Nanette. And Kiddush is sponsored by the Siegel family. It's also sponsored by my son and daughter-in-law, Mendy and Adele Bryski. They're celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary. You should have lots of simcha, lots of mazel, lots of nachas, lots of happiness. We conclude, the Shabbos is Chazak. We conclude a book. We conclude the book of Exodus. And in its grand finale, so to say, the concluding portion of the book of Exodus is called Pikude. That's the name of the last portion of the book of Exodus, Pikude. The word Pikude means an accounting. And in its opening verses, we have this accounting. What's the accounting? Moses gives a complete detailed account of all the donations that were contributed for the construction of the Mishkan, the construction of the tabernacle. And Moses doesn't leave out a single coin. Everything that the people contributed, he has an accounting for. And he details for us in the portion how many pounds of gold and of silver and of copper and exactly what it was used for, every piece of jewelry, every piece of metal that came into his hands. And the question could be asked, why is this so relevant? Why did Moses have to give such a detailed accounting? Did people suspect that Moses was putting some cash off on the side? That Moses perhaps had a Swiss bank account and he was somehow shipping some funds to another account somewhere, that he has to give this detailed account? And even if Moses felt compelled to give such an accounting, why does the Torah have to record it in such detail? It could have simply said, and Moses gave the Jewish people an accounting of all that was raised and what it was used for. 1 or 2 verses could have sufficed. Instead, every single detail, every weight, every item. So we'll get back to this question later. That's the opening question that we're going to build on, and we'll come back to it. Let's take a look at the name of the portion itself, because the name of every Torah portion captures the very essence and the theme of the portion. As I mentioned, Pikude means an accounting. And when we talk about accounting, it represents an individual count of each donation and item separately. And it begins, like I said, with Moses giving such an account of every single detail of every contribution. But yet, if you look at the portion as a whole, the portion is really devoted, most of the portion, to the assembly of the Mishkan. Now that we had all these contributions, and now that we built every single item as was told by God to Moses and detailed in the portion of Terumah. And now that we created the garments of the high priest as was detailed for us in the portion of Tetzaveh, and everything was done and all the work was done, this week's portion goes ahead and tells us exactly how it was erected, how it was put together. It gives us exactly the details. And that the divine presence came and dwelt inside the Mishkan, that God rested in the Mishkan. And so much of the portion is dealing with the actual putting together of the Mishkan. So why is its name given to be the name of accounting when that what took up just a number of verses in the portion. Instead of calling it, perhaps the name of the portion would have been called Mishkan, the sanctuary, the dwelling place, because that was the main theme. So I'd like to take a more general look, not just on this week's portion, but on the entire book of Exodus and compare it to the book of Genesis. Because in this entire book of Exodus, what comes through as a theme is the nation of Israel, the people of Israel. The book of Shemos is really about nation building. If you think about how we are called in Genesis, in the book of Bereshis, there we are called the children of Israel. We're called after a family. Now we're called Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel. Because Genesis is all about a family. It's about Abraham, it's about Isaac, it's about his children, it's about individuals. If you want to go back earlier, it's about Adam, it's about Eve, it's about the serpent, it's about Cain, it's about Noah, it's about Ishmael, it's about Joseph, it's about individuals. It's a book about individual stories. Exodus is about a nation. It's about a people. Yes, it has individual characters. It has Pharaoh, and it has Yocheved, and it has Pharaoh's daughter, and it has Aaron, and then it has Jethro, and then of course it has Moses. But all of these names there are not about their individual story, but about how they came together to help mold and build a nation. So you see the difference? Bereshis, individuals, we learn about their character, focus on the individual. Shemos, although it has individuals, book of Exodus, it's all about how we built a nation and how this disjointed and this oppressed group of slaves were transformed into a nation and then brought to Sinai. And at Sinai, this nation is given its mission. It's given its constitution. And then 40 days after the giving of the constitution and the mission to this new nation, in this moment we would call of collective insanity, the people deny God and they begin worshiping a golden calf. And now God views his attempt to mold a people into a kingdom of princes and a holy nation as a failure. And Moses comes along and he stands up to God and he elicits from God this deeper relationship with the Jewish people. So God re-embraces the people and he instructs them in this book of Exodus to build a home in their midst for his presence. So see to it we don't have this golden calf again. Build a house for me that I will dwell amongst you. So I won't be distant from you. And that's the construction of this Mishkan, of this tabernacle, which later, when the Jewish people enter into the land of Israel, becomes the Holy Temple on the Temple Mount. But while they're in the wilderness, it's a mobile unit called the Mishkan. And that's what Terumah, the portion of Terumah, the portion of Tetzaveh, the portion of Vayakel, and this week's portion, Vayakel-Pikude, deal with. So when the calling comes out to build this home for God, the Jewish people en masse, everyone contributes large amounts of gold and of silver and of copper and many other materials required for the construction of this beautiful tabernacle. And Moses appoints architects and sculptors and designers to build the home and to design the vessels and to carve out the furniture exactly as God so described. So this is a home of the people, built by the people, serving every single member of the people, with the donations of every single Jew who wished to contribute or to volunteer in any given way. And at last, this long journey is complete. And at the opening of this last portion of this book, the book of Exodus, the portion of that we're going to read tomorrow of Pikude, along with the portion of Vayakel, the national project is done. They worked hard. They contributed a great deal. They put all their effort in. They're building a house for God. And the sanctuary will be erected, and the divine presence will move into the sanctuary. And there's this charged moment, there's this dramatic peak in this long journey of the people. Because after all the ups and downs, we began with slavery in Egypt in the beginning of the book, and we conclude with God moving in and living amongst his people. Very powerful story, this book of Exodus. But here comes the challenge. Does nation building, by definition, come at the expense of the individual? Now, of course, you can't have a nation without individuals joining together, but perhaps the value of the individual is only as so far as he or she becomes a part of the whole. The value of my I is only due to the fact that it contributes to the we. And many of us feel this way, right? A sense of peoplehood has long been the defining characteristic of the Jewish people. The central experience of Jewish history is the Exodus from Egypt. This was an experience that we went through nationally as a people. Wherever we've gone, we've built synagogues, communal synagogues. We've done things together as a we, communal responsibility, community, shul. All of it is the we, the building of the nation. And here comes the revolutionary message of the portion of Pikude. But don't forget the individual. See, before we conclude the book of Exodus, this dedication to nation building, the Torah dedicates the final portion to the idea of the individual. So the Torah interrupts the narrative, shifting the story from creating a space for God in this world to the work of counting every individual contribution which came in. And Moses presents in a detailed account every last shekel that was donated to the cause. There is no contribution that is not worthy of being accounted for. Why? To teach us that there is no person who is not recognized as an individual. Judaism wants to be very, very careful that yes, nationhood and nation building and the collective we is critical and important, but so is the individual. So many of our prayers are written personal. They're written singular. Don't get lost in the whole. You, the individual, have a personal relationship with God. Yes, you're part of the chosen people. You're part of the nation. You're part of Am Yisrael, but you're also yourself. You're also your own individual. And there is that personal relationship. And therefore, every contribution that was brought to the Mishkan was critical, was important. And Moses itemized it, a separate line for every individual's giving, every individual's charity. This is what you gave. You got your own receipt in the mail, or you got it as an email, whichever Moses wanted to use. A century ago, there lived this great symphony conductor, an Italian maestro named Arturo Toscanini. And he was one of the most acclaimed musicians of the late 19th and 20th century. He was known for his perfectionism. He was an absolute perfectionist in his conduction of his symphony. And Toscanini had a biographer who would interview him periodically over the years as part of a book he was writing on his life. And one evening he calls Toscanini and he tells him he's going to be in town the next night and he wanted to know if he can come over to interview him. So Toscanini answers him that he won't be able to because he's doing something special that would require absolute concentration and he can't be disturbed. So the biographer said, if I may ask, what is it that you're doing that's so special? So he said, there's a concert taking place overseas. And I used to be the conductor of that symphony orchestra, but this year I couldn't be there. But they have set up that I'm able to listen on something called shortwave radio. I'm going to be able to listen in. And I'm going to hear how the other conductor leads the orchestra. And I don't want any interruptions. When this sound comes in, I want to be able to concentrate. So the biographer says, it would be my greatest pleasure to be able to just sit there and watch you as you listen to what you used to conduct. And I want to just see your reaction to it as it comes through this shortwave radio. So he says, as long as you promise not to say a word, not to interrupt, he says, I promise, then you can come. And he comes there, he watches, Toscanini is listening to the concert. It went on for about an hour, and finally it came to an end. And the biographer says when it's over, wow, that was magnificent. That was so special. Toscanini says, it wasn't so good. What do you mean it wasn't so good? It sounded great to me. He says, yeah, but there was supposed to be 120 musicians playing, including 15 violinists. I can tell that only 119 showed up and 14 violinists showed up, not 15. So the biographer thought he was joking. There's no way in the world from 6,000 miles away over shortwave radio that you would know how many musicians were playing and how many violinists were playing. He couldn't believe that it's even possible. So the next morning he had to find out for himself. So he investigates and he calls the concert hall and he speaks to the musical director and he says, how many musicians were there last night? He says, one fellow didn't show up. We were supposed to have 120, 119 showed up. One of the violinists didn't show up. He couldn't believe it. So he goes back to Toscanini and he says, how is it possible that you knew? I listened to the same concert. I didn't pick up any shortness, any void. So Toscanini says, there's a difference between you and me. You're a part of the audience. And to the audience, everything sounds wonderful. But I'm the conductor. And the conductor knows every note of music that has to be played. And therefore, when I heard certain sounds that weren't coming through, I knew that one of those violinists were missing. There is the collective, there is the symphony, and then there are the individual players. Every one of you are an individual player in the symphony of God. So yes, we do play a major role to the world of being a light unto the nations as Am Yisrael, but we don't lose our individuality. Every one of us still play our own personal role in the mission that God gave us. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, once I read an article of his where he wrote that he asked the Catholic writer Paul Johnson, who wrote the book, A History of the Jews. And he said, with all of your research, what struck you most about Judaism? What stands out the most? You spent years and years to prepare for this book. What touches you the most? And this is what Paul Johnson said. There have been in the course of history societies that emphasized the individual, like the secular West today. It's all a race for the success of the individual. There have been others that place their weight on the collective. It's all about collective, like communist Russia, like communist China. It's all about the party. Judaism, he continued, was the most successful example he knew of a tradition that managed the delicate balance between both, giving equal weight to the individual and equal weight to the collective responsibility. Judaism was a religion of individuals and of communities. And that, he said, was very rare and very difficult and constituted one of Judaism's greatest achievements, that we were able to balance it. The importance of the individual Jew, the importance of Am Yisrael. We really see this hinted to and alluded to in God's opening communications with Abraham. If you remember, he promises Abraham various different blessings. And after the binding of Isaac, he says to him, he builds on the blessing and he says, I will increase your children like the stars of the heaven and the sand of the sea. So there are times we're given the blessings of the stars of the heaven that we're going to multiply like the stars of the heaven. There are times we're given the blessing like the sand of the sea. And there are times where God uses both examples. And in this particular blessing to Abraham, he says, I will increase your children like the stars of heaven and the sand of the sea. Why do we need both illustrations in the blessing? If you are familiar with the world itself, the number of stars, by the way, exceed the sand at the beaches. So if you're going to give a blessing and say you shall multiply like the stars of the heaven, it doesn't make sense to then add the smaller blessing, the sand of the sea. You either start with the small and build up, but you don't start with the large and then go down. So why does God use both expressions, the stars of the heaven and the sand of the sea? And the answer is as follows. It's not just about numbers that we're talking about. Because the truth of the matter is the Jewish people were never the largest nation on the face of the earth. We're always the smallest. So why are we given these blessings of stars in heaven and the sand on the shore? Because a single grain of sand is valueless. It has no value. It only has value when it's combined together with other grains of sand, and then it makes a beautiful beach. But one granulate of sand doesn't amount to anything. Together, it has value. Stars, in contrast, are individuals. Each one is a powerful source of light and energy on its own. Indeed, two stars coming together can be a destructive force. When stars collide, they destroy each other. So sand, its greatness is when it comes together. Stars, the individual. So God tells Abraham that we will be blessed with both these qualities, sand and stars. On one hand, we're all united. We are one. If I am for myself, what am I? Hillel taught us. On my own, I'm a grain of sand. Together, when I connect my life with others, with family, with community, with the Jewish nation, and all people, I become much larger, much deeper. But there's another side to the promise. Your children will be like the stars. Each person will be unique, each one giving forth their very own light. As the Baal Shem Tov said when asked to describe what is a Jew, he said, a Jew is a letter in the scroll, a letter in the Torah scroll. The Torah scroll contains 304,805 letters. If the Torah scroll is missing but one letter, the entire scroll is unfit to use. A Jew is a letter in the scroll. Without each individual, we don't have a Torah. We need the individual in order to make the collective one, but that each individual is a star in their own right. Moses knows that there's a danger in building a nation. That when you focus just on the big picture, you can lose sight of the individual. That you can see the forest and you lose sight of the individual tree. So in his work of building this grand home, this Mishkan, the individual can feel insignificant. What am I? What difference do I make? I'm only one of a million. A grain on the sand of the seashore. So Moses teaches the people that there is no value, that there is the God of all, but there's also the God of one. And so he itemizes each individual, what you brought. You brought 10 shekels to the Mishkan. Wow, thank you so much. You brought this, thank you so much. Because he wants to stress in this final portion of the book of building the nation, that this is only going to work, this experiment of the Jewish people will only work if we retain the value of each individual. A good Shabbos, everyone. Enjoy this very special Shabbos, the Shabbos Chazak, Shabbos HaChodesh, Shabbos Mevorchim. It's got so many blessings in it. Enjoy it. Take it all in. You should all have a wonderful Shabbos, a wonderful week. We'll see you back Monday evening at 7:30 as we conclude the story of the binding of Isaac. Take care, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.